All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, I'll be looking at the 2024 College Football National Championship game between Washington and Michigan. Two teams sitting at 14-0. Wolverines 4.5-point favorites. 55.5 is the total. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN. Monday, January 8th, live from NRG Stadium in Houston, Texas. The latest time these teams met was in 2021 in Ann Arbor. Michigan winning that 131-10. Looking at this Washington offense, Michael Penix coming off an elite effort in New Orleans. He put on an absolute clinic. 430 yards, 2 touchdowns, season high in terms of, his PFF passer grade, which was over 93. Also posted a season high in rushing yards at 31. They added a little bit of a wrinkle in terms of, QB draws, 3 carries to reach that total. So that was something that they exploited against Texas that you don't see very often with Penix. But his accuracy in New Orleans was just terrific. 76% pinpoint down the field. They're able to generate big plays. They're able to be at the sticks. This is a guy that was on fire. I think at one point he was averaging like 36 yards per completion. So Penix was just completely on fire. The last 3 games of the regular season, under 57% completion rating. Obviously the game against Utah and Oregon State, weather played a big factor in that one. And then against Washington State, certainly didn't have the greatest effort either. Only topped 205 yards once over the last 3 regular season games. Back-to-back games, though, played in domes. And, he was able to put up 319 against Oregon, and again, a masterful game against Texas. And this is going to be a 3rd straight game in a dome for him, so weather is not going to be limiting this offense by any means, which is certainly a big deal for them, considering they love to air it out. This is a guy who has terrific, air yards, and, Penix was just terrific for, once again, his ability to, understand coverages and, blitz pickups. The Texas, their defensive line was not able to generate much one bit in terms of getting him rattled. And obviously, we'll talk about the Michigan defense and what they can do to try and do that. Looking at the receiving core, though, these guys are terrific. Rome Odunze, 87 grabs, 1,553 yards, 13 touchdowns. Jalen Polk, over 1,100 yards of his own, 9 touchdowns. Jalen McMillan's really battled injuries this year. He's got 526 and 4 scores. And everybody was pitching in against Texas. Even Gurmy Bernard had a nice downfield reception. He's got 34 grabs, 400-plus yards. And, that's what Washington likes to do. They get these guys downfield, vertical crossing routes, plenty of depth on those routes. Odunze, McMillan, these guys are incredibly physical. On the boundary, their ability to, win contested catches and jump balls. It's more than just Penix having great accuracy. These guys are certainly built for the scheme, and their ability to be aggressive is certainly big in that. And Jack Westover, a guy I absolutely love, 391 and 41 receptions this season for him. He's just been a guy you can look to at the sticks, very reliable, very strong-handed player there at the tight end position. Devin Culp, I think he was open on one of those plays late in the game. Sometime in the second half, Penix missed him. That was the only mistake he made, slight overthrow there. Biggest thing you want to watch with this offense, that was Dylan Johnson and his health. Obviously, late in the game, his injury really almost costed them the game. They could have put the clock under 20 seconds. Instead, it stayed at 50 with him being unable to walk off the field. Ended up leaving on the cart with some crutches, 49 yards for him on 21 carries. It was tough sledding, 2 touchdowns though, and you figured they would struggle against Texas's run defense, but they really just want to keep their opponent honest, and that's what you got to have to do against Michigan, because they're also incredibly sound up front. And this is a rushing attack that's only topped 150 yards twice this year. Once was against an abysmal USC defense. The other one was against Michigan State. That was only one game of 200-plus yards, and that was against the USC Trojans. So this is an offense that they like to be honest, in terms of what they want to do. Their defense only once this year if they topped over 40 carries, and that was also in Los Angeles. 102 against Texas, 157 against Oregon, where Johnson had a big day. 5 straight games of 100-plus rushing for this offense against some really good defenses. That's exactly where they want to be. And if they can put up another 100-yard effort here against the Wolverines, they're going to be pretty confident in what they can do on this side of the ball. The offensive line for Washington has always been an underrated part of this offense. Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. They still probably don't get the credit they should. That's all the talk was before the Sugar Bowl was, the Texas defensive line, their physicality. And there's certainly a fair point to be made there. I felt like the interior for Washington will probably struggle in this game. They do have a great center in Parker Brailsford, but Julius Bulow at his guard position, Nate Coleppo as well, they're not exactly as sound as these tackles are. And the guards certainly struggled a good bit, especially on the interior as a whole. But these tackles are as good as it gets. At left tackle, Troy Fautanu having an elite season. Roger Rosengart in his right guard spot. These guys, They don't allow much in terms of pressures, and they definitely don't give up many sacks. I mean, this team, experiences plenty of dropbacks on a weekly basis, and they're not giving up much. These are two elite tackles here. And obviously, the Michigan pass rush had plenty of success against Alabama, and that offensive line certainly was pretty disappointing from the Crimson Tide. Their stunts, their twists, but also pre-snap recognition by Jalen Milroe was clearly just not a good part of his game, and that was very much so exploited in that contest in the Rose Bowl. That's not going to be the case here against a veteran quarterback. Michael Penix is going to be well aware of pre-snap reads, and these offensive linemen, these guys are veterans. They're also going to be well in tune. They're going to have great communication. So it's going to be interesting, that kind of chess match. I'm sure Michigan's going to be well aware of that. And this is not a quarterback you want to blitz either. We're obviously going to talk about the defense in full in a little bit. But this is not a quarterback you want to send pressure at one bit. And if you do, you hope you get some hands up or you get home in a hurry, because he will certainly make you pay. Overall, though, the Washington offense, after a couple of weeks in a row of struggling, they've really bounced back, 34 and 37 in each of the last two. They got a little conservative there in the last quarter against Texas, pulled out a couple of trick plays, weren't really able to execute, and that almost costed them the game. But this offense is terrific, and they certainly, if they don't let their foot off the pedal, they would be putting up a lot more than that. And they had 530 yards total against the Longhorns, and Penix, again, was just completely on fire. So this is an offense that can certainly execute, especially against a tough defense like Michigan's. Now you look at the head to the Michigan offense. This is a unit that certainly is well in tune when it comes to physical rushing attack. And Alabama, they really cracked down on that in the second half. There's not much breathing room one bit. And then, of course, Blake Corum was able to find the end zone in overtime on a nice cut back there, a nice jump cut from him. He ended the day with 83 yards on 19 carries, a touchdown for him. He was also able to catch one out of the backfield, his first of the season, where Bama, their secondary, certainly the two catches they allowed to Corum for 35 yards. Certainly not great to see Bama be mispositioned like that, but that's certainly something you can look to probably do against the less talented unit of Washington's. But this running game certainly hasn't been as efficient as in the past. 36 touchdowns is great, 25 from Corum, most of them coming between the tackles, most of them coming in between the 5-yard line as well. 4.2 yards per carry. Not the strongest mark, considering they've had well over 5.5 each of the last two seasons. Donovan Edwards, his efficiency is incredibly low. 393 yards on 113 attempts. 3 scores for him. Aquil Mullings has been involved a little bit this year. 201 rushing, mainly been a good blocker for them. This run game has certainly still been strong. They only have, one game of 200-plus yards since the beginning of October, though, so that's certainly a bit of a concern. That was 227 against Penn State, where they were able to really grind down the Nittany Lions. Also ripped off a big run or two in that one. Iowa, though, completely held them in check. The Buckeyes, they got grinded down also in the late fourth quarter there. Still, about 156 yards in that contest. And then against Alabama, only 130 yards rushing. And, a good bit of that came in the first half, where they were able to, stay ahead of the sticks. And they were able to do that all afternoon long. They don't get tackled behind, for negative losses very much. So the Michigan run game, though, they're incredibly physical. And even though they don't have the greatest of numbers, I guess, other than the, amazing amount of touchdowns, this is a rushing attack that could certainly grind you down. And they're not looking to be too flashy. That's what they want to do, control clock and, just blow you off the ball in that regard. J.G. McCarthy, he's obviously really good of his legs. 171 this year, 3 touchdowns. This is a guy we didn't see run too much against Bama, 25 yards on 3 carries, only 17 against Ohio State as well. So he's certainly looking to make more plays from the pocket than he has run, but that's certainly an added dimension. They can certainly uncork at any moment. And, the numbers will say otherwise, but McCarthy, everyone knows he's a dual-threat guy who can certainly burn you if the opportunity is presented. 73% completion rating this year, 2,800 yards as a passer, only 4 picks, 22 touchdowns from JJ. Was able to, salvage a bit of a tough effort against Bama for 221 and 3 scores there. After that, before that, the last month of the season had been really a tough sledding for him, especially the game against Maryland, where he made some really bad throws, ended up with 1 interception, probably could have had a few more as well. The Terrapins were able to, pressure him a good bit, forced him into some mistakes. Alabama, they weren't able to generate any mistakes from McCarthy, and, really up until that last drive, that would have been tough sledding through the air. Of course, a nice dump-off pass, across the middle on a drag to Tyler Morris in the first half, allowed them to get some separation there. Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, for the most part, these guys were held in check. Wilson ended up having a big reception in that final drive. He ended up, finishing it off, I think, on that drive with a touchdown as well. So Roman Wilson, this is a veteran that they look to at the sticks. Nice, crafty route runner. Colston Loveland, though, he was not involved. 2 catches for 13 yards, usually taken away Cornelius Johnson, he also only had 2 grabs for 12 yards. So these guys are pretty much rendered ineffective against Alabama. They're really able to lock them down. These are all 3 weapons that can really hurt you. Loveland, he tore apart the Buckeyes down the seam. A.J. Barner, another tight end who has some production this year, about 250 yards on 20-plus receptions. 2 nice tight ends they have there. And you saw plenty of 11 personnel against Alabama. They're typically in 12 very often, and you didn't really see them load up with a line of scrimmage of multiple linemen, kind of like you saw against Penn State. No, deep, heavy sets. I don't recall. Maybe there was a time or two, but really there were a lot of 11 personnel, and they were kind of keeping, Alabama off balance, not just with that, because they probably weren't expected to see, 3 receivers and 1 tight end, but they also had a, diversity of run calls. Alex Orji came out there a few times, in terms of misdirection runs. Michigan was able to do that. Didn't really find them often running right through the tackles. They're trying to attack the boundary and whatnot. So it wasn't, it was a pretty good staple of runs from Michigan, really able to keep Alabama off balance, especially in that first half. And that really allowed them to pick up some nice yards. In the second half, that was certainly a big issue, trying to find run lanes. Look at this offensive line. Obviously, beat out for the Joe Moore Award. Zach Zinner going down was a big loss at that right guard spot, but it's kind of a saving grace as it allowed them to kick Carson Barnhart inside to that spot where he's been an issue at right tackle this year at times. Drake Nugent, terrific center that came over from Stanford this season. Love what he's been able to accomplish for him. Right tackle, Trente Jones has been able to really hold that down. Miles Hinton, he's been solid at times, but I think a big problem here is, Ladarius Henderson at left tackle the last 3 games. He's just been abysmal. He's not really been that great. He's been giving up a lot of pressures. I think he's only given up 1 sack in those games, though, so he's not getting completely mauled. But now they do have to face Braylon Trice, who I'm pretty sure still leads the nation in pressures. So this is going to be something to watch. And I've been harping on these tackles the last couple of weeks, and it hasn't costed them yet. And Jones is still a very capable right tackle, so the injury for Zinter, it's not going to be an excuse by any means. I think this offensive line is well equipped to handle that, especially with Trevor Keegan at left guard. Very good pass blockers on the interior, but these tackles, Jones I think will be fine, but Henderson, you got to continue to watch him because he's really been a problem in terms of allowing pressure. The left tackle spot, him and Braylon Trice will be an interesting battle. Hasn't burned them just yet, and they certainly want to avoid dropping back as much as possible, but it could certainly burn you on any play, especially in these close games like this. 1 fumble could be a problem, but it hasn't happened yet, so I don't expect too much from this offensive line in terms of allowing negative plays. I think the run blocking is great. Seems like a pretty solid matchup for them overall. But this is a Michigan offense. They've been able to really execute with balance, able to finish the job off despite really just a tough afternoon, mainly in that second half against Alabama. End of the day with 351, about 6 yards per play. Numerous 3 and outs, though, in that second frame. McCarthy had the first play of the game, was intercepted, but, the guy was out of bounds, so got away with one there. Had a handful of drops, too, from the receivers, so you certainly want to see them execute a little bit more. I think the offense here, though, they're going to be just fine as they're not playing an elite defense on Monday night. Now you look at the Washington defense unit that's given up 31 points in each of the last 2 games. But that doesn't tell the full story. I was in there in Vegas against Oregon. They held up very well in terms of allowing big passing plays. They really held that run game in check. Obviously, the final stats are going to say, otherwise. They gave up, 363 on 54 plays to Oregon. They couldn't run the ball, though, against the Huskies one bit, and they had that 75-yard passing touchdown that boosted their total to 239 through the air. Really held them in check in that game. The Ducks really flustered. Against Texas, they put up almost 500 yards, 498 on offense. And they were able to run the ball very well. Go ahead and start with their, 180 rushing yards for Texas. They're really playing from behind most of this game, so they weren't able to really consistently establish this. 28 carries, though, 9 attempts, 64 yards, 9 and 59, 8 and 54. That's what the opposing players for Texas had. Highly efficient, over 6.5 for 3 different guys. The longest run they had was 21 by the quarterback. So they weren't ripping off the biggest of runs. A couple of drive starters, though, that really helped them. So this rushing defense, though, that's going to be the biggest story here, is what can they do against a physical downhill rushing attack. They have plenty of physicality up front. They have a running back who's incredibly patient and makes plenty of good moves, great vision as well. They were good against Oregon. They were not good against Texas. They held up very well against Oregon State, though. A nice rushing attack led by Damian Martinez, a very similar style of offense that they looked very good against. USC was able to rip off some big runs in that first game with Oregon. They, gave up 204 yards, but they were able to match them in terms of physicality. So this run defense has proven they can play good football, right? But the game against Texas is really concerning just because the linebackers were really mispositioned. Udafanu Afashio, Carson Brunner. These guys are really good linebackers, right? But against Texas, they were just out of position. And, obviously they're playing some wider alignments to try and not give up big plays against the pass, which really worked out for them. And it wasn't that big of a concern. But these linebackers are going to have to be more physical, and I definitely think that Michigan will be in some more condensed formations, which could certainly help you. More hats will be in the box for them. The linebackers, Alfonso Tupatala, he's another one that certainly have to step up. Good news for them, though, is they do have a phenomenal weapon up front in terms of defensive line. Letua Glazanoa at defensive tackle. He's terrific. He's this team is completely different when he's on the field in terms of stopping the run. 6'1", 292 out of Concord, California. He's a great player, and I certainly think they have plenty of guys in this front six who can make plays. Alluded to some of the linebackers. Braylon Trice, obviously, he's going to be a big difference maker. 11.5 tackles for loss this year, 7 sacks. His, in terms of production, didn't start off the year all that great, but he was able to find 2 sacks against Texas. That's his 4th over the last 4 games. This is a guy who generates plenty of pressures. Again, against Ladarius Henderson, might be something to watch. 77 total pressures this season. The rest of the team, they've certainly been trying to find some pass rush, and it hasn't always worked out for them. Zion Tupulu Fatui, a veteran who's really battled a lot through his career here at Washington. You're going to look to turn to him to try and find some production as well. He's got 5 sacks on the season. A little quiet, though, against the Horns. They have very capable football players here. all these guys have really battled stuff. Uafashi always had season-ending injuries in 3 or 4 straight years before this season. But I think they have capable players here. It's really going to be tough to find out how good they will be, though, because this is a different type of physicality. But from what I saw against Oregon State, they were able to match that when it mattered most. That was a game that was, certainly plagued by weather. But still, it was hat on a hat, and they were able to conquer that challenge. So that's going to be a big thing to watch. And, I want to talk about this secondary. I figured coming into the Sugar Bowl, the biggest key was which secondary would crack first, because both of them had been prone to allowing big plays. Washington and Texas, who would crack the most. And Washington really didn't crack that much. Obviously in the fourth quarter, they obviously given up some big plays, a lot of yards. Elijah Jackson had some bad plays, ended up making the game-winning pass deflection there. But this secondary, for the most part, really impressed me. They were unable to get Xavier Worthy the football. They're unable to generate much through the air. Quinn Ewers and those guys, they were scratching their heads for most of that contest. They ended up with 318 yards, and they were able to get big plays going. I think only the first plays, C.J. Baxter burned them for 31. Other than that, though, they really locked down a talented receiving core. And obviously, these are 2 different types of offenses. Michigan's going to look to try and burn you with some play action. They're obviously in the shotgun a lot, crossing routes, something you want to look for, the short game, the tight ends. There's plenty of things Michigan's going to look to do that's going to exploit you different than Texas. But they were able to pass the challenge of guys like Worthy, Sanders, Whittington. Again, the fourth quarter kind of got out of hand for them. But for the rest of the game, the entire body of work says otherwise. Jamar Muhammad is a terrific corner. Elijah Jackson certainly had a bit of a headache there. They're glad to have Asa Turner back. He made some big-time tackles. He's a good run defender, his safety spot, so we'll see what kind of role he plays at their other safety spot, Cameron Fabu-Kalanen. He's terrific as well when it comes to being a nice run-up tackler. Thought he's played very good in coverage this year, and he's showcased physicality, be able to fight through screens, get through blocks. So this is going to be an interesting matchup. I think people are going to write off this Washington run defense, and I can totally, kind of understand why, but not fully, because I think there's capable football players at all 3 levels that can make plays. Michel Powell's a good corner. Dom Hampton, he's one of their top tacklers. So this is going to be a fun little matchup. They are prone to giving up big plays in the secondary. Michigan, they don't exactly have burners. I think Tyler Morris has got some good speed, but it's going to be an interesting challenge, I think, overall for Washington, and that's going to ultimately decide this game, is how good they do against the run. You look at the Michigan defense, this is a unit that's really able to shut down the Bama passing attack due to the success they had with their pass rush. 6 sacks by 5 different players, showcasing that versatility. Josiah Stewart, Braden McGregor, Chris Jenkins, Derek Moore. Phenomenal edge rushers for them. Michael Barrett was able to also find home for one of them. And, this was a big part of this game. No one really expected to take place. I didn't think they would either. But they were just really able to confuse the Alabama offensive line in terms of stunts, twists. They also had, a nice win against J.C. Latham 1-on-1 right before the half ended that drive. Obviously they took advantage of some Bama mistakes, and those were some of the mistakes. Pre-snap recognition by Jalen Milroe, not good at all. And that's where I think the biggest thing is going to dictate this game on this side of the ball is they're not going to be able to have that same success. I just don't think it's going to be possible against this offensive line and against this quarterback to just be able to confuse them in terms of blitzes. And I think Jesse Minter is well aware of that, so that's going to be an interesting chess match to see how that one plays us out, disguises and whatnot. they're not going to be as effective. We'll see what kind of pressure they can generate, where you have to get home against this guy, because if you pressure him and you miss, he's going to pick you apart, and that's something that's really just going to make this such a beautiful game to watch. But this is just a versatile pass rush. Just alluded to some of those guys that were able to record some numbers there. Mason Graham's terrific. Kenneth Grant, Rayshawn Benny, phenomenal defensive line. They've really developed these guys to a great tune. Jalen Harrell as well. Incredible depth, nice size, nice rotation. An NFL caliber defensive line. Obviously, Minter coming over from the Ravens certainly has put these guys to great use, kind of like Baltimore does. I love the guys that have the middle. Alluded to Michael Barrett having a nice sack. Junior Colson, a bit of a quieter game from him. But overall, he's still a great run defender. He has no problem getting in there against the run and defending. It's going to be interesting to see his role. I mean, he did have 10 tackles in this game, but he didn't really hear his name called all that often in this contest. Certainly has to be stout in coverage, something he's certainly capable against these tight ends, Jack Westover and Devin Culp and Barrett. He's also been really good this year in all facets, especially coverage. He's been a really impressive pass rusher, and I think he's going to be an X factor to watch. He's going to be that patroller you look to try and make quiet plays, kind of like he did against Bama with that big sack, where he just, lately, right before the snap, came out of nowhere and, found that crease, no line. Big play there. Love the front six that Michigan possesses, incredibly deep on this side of the ball. And, you want to look at their secondary. This is a team that loves to play cover three. They played at OSU, not recently ago, where they played C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson. This is a secondary that held up very well in that game against Ohio State, the 3 first-rounders they got, where they just kept everything in front of them. The Buckeyes, obviously, they're going to get their numbers, and the same thing's probably going to be said about Washington, right? They're going to get their numbers, big plays. That was Ohio State's theme. That's going to be Washington's theme. Obviously, they just played Marvin Harrison as well, and Harrison, he had a pretty fair day against them. But I certainly look to that Ohio State game they had a couple seasons ago, where they played those talented receivers in Columbus, and they were able to really stay ahead of them for the most part, just because they weren't giving up the big plays. They were being physical with the pass catchers, keeping everything in front of them. That's what you're going to look to do here. Try and force some mistakes. It's going to be hard to certainly do that. They gave up 349 and 2 scores in that game. They also had 2 interceptions. So I think that's certainly going to be a tape they watch in this game. They're going to be, once again, facing the best receiving core in America. Guys like JSN, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, pretty comparable to what, Polk, McMillan, and Odunze are going to be possessing in this game. Certainly different styles of offense, much stronger arm, and this Michael Penix guy, I think certainly better in some of those pre-snap recognitions as well. But that was the key in that game, and that's where they were able to have good success against that offense. 12 missed tackles by this defense against Alabama. Pretty uncharacteristic, especially Mike Sanders still. He had 4 of those missed tackles, looking for a bounce-back game. This is a team who's incredibly fresh in the secondary. They were able to rotate a good bit this year. Makari Page, Rod Moore, Keon Sabb, they like to rotate their safeties pretty well. And, Bama tried a couple of deep balls. Nothing was available. We'll see what happens if this pass rush gets shut out, because they weren't able to really get home that often against Maryland, and they got torched. I mean, they got flat out dominated out wide. Will Johnson, a great corner, had a pick against Marvin Harrison Jr. in coverage, Josh Wallace as well. And, they did have 5 sacks against Maryland, right? But when I allude to them not being able to get home, that's when they got tossed up there. So that was their second-best game of the year in terms of pass rushing, and they still got electrocuted in the secondary. So it's going to be something you want to watch for if the secondary is able to get home against these phenomenal tackles. What are they going to do? Good chess match we have on this side of the ball. But this is a capable defense from head to toe, especially in the secondary. Sanders still great in the slot. Phenomenal ball skills as a former wide receiver. Needs to be more sound in tackling in this game, though, because these guys can certainly hurt you in the open field. There's going to be a lot of space, though, given up. That's just how you got to play defense, with such a wide field. And that's where Washington really thrives is, quick out routes, speed outs, deep post routes across the middle of the field. Penix was obviously able to dodge a couple of sacks against Texas, and he makes you burn. So when you get near him, you can't miss, or it's going to be bad news bears for your defense. Looking at the team comparisons, at quarterback, Penix a clear edge there. McCarthy, we obviously know what he can do with his legs. He's been so good at protecting the football, an efficient passer as well. Penix, though, one of the game's best. Running back position, Dylan Johnson, we'll see what his status is. Something you certainly want to monitor. Regardless, though, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, even though Edwards' numbers aren't all that great, it's still, one of the top 1-2 punches in America. At wide receiver, this is the nation's best pass-catching group. The Huskies are going to get that edge every single time. Offensive line, I got to give it to the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line. Their tackles are much more stout than what the Wolverines have. The interior for Michigan, though, is probably a lot better than what Washington has. Huskies are still going to get the edge for me. A lot of clean pockets they generate. Kalen DeBoer's group does a good job of allowing Penix to just throttle it downfield. I mean, 50-yard plays downfield don't come just from a big arm. You have to have good blocking as well, and they do that. Clean sweep across the board on defense for Michigan. It's been like that most of this season, especially in games like Alabama and Ohio State, where you really can't give the edge to the opposition. They're just incredibly deep on the D-line with their size, the rotation, the linebacking group's terrific. Secondary is incredibly talented as well. Washington, they have plenty of strong talent in their own right, but they're not going to get the edge on any of these sides of the ball. But again, their secondary played very good against Texas. This defensive line has some ballers as well. They'll be playing on Sundays. Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction, keys to the game. For Washington, you want to let Penix lead you to the promised land. You certainly will find yourself being conservative at times. I don't think that's going to be the case here. You're going to let him throw it as many times as he wants. Must be tough against the run. Got to probably get some extra hats in the box. And I certainly wonder if Michigan runs more 12 personnel in this game, how many guys are going to be crowded alongside the line of scrimmage. And I think this is a battle that they'll have some success against. I think Michigan's certainly probably going to do a fair job of running the football in this game. But is it going to be the tune of 250, 300 yards that really put it away? Not convinced that will happen. The pass rush plan won't be as strong versus this group for Michigan. How else can they rattle Penix? I think that's going to be Mentor's biggest problem this game. Not going to be so worried about the secondary, but how can they generate pressure? If you can't do that, then you certainly have an issue in all regards. And I think control the game for Michigan, that's what you want to do. Long drives, you've seen it against Ohio State and Penn State to seal the deal. Weren't really able to do that against Alabama. But this group was incredibly capable of controlling the game. These are the matchups you live for. Growing up, I loved seeing great defenses against elite quarterbacks, and that's what you have here. And this story for Washington, I think it's going to have one more in them. They have the nation's longest winning streak here. This offense, they're just too tough. The Michigan pass rush, I hate to bet against them, but this is a completely different offensive line than what you had at Alabama. These guys are not going to fold against these blitzes. Penix, I think he's going to be strong. And I think the run game for Michigan will do some work, but I don't think it's going to be 300 yards and 5 touchdowns or anything like that. Higher scoring game, I think will be back and forth for the most part, but Washington, they're going to have some quick strikes of their own. They haven't really folded that much against some really talented defenses this season. And this is going to be a great matchup top to bottom, a complete chess match. Certainly some of the key points I continue to harp on, things you want to look for. I'm going to stick with Washington. I picked them before the playoff to win the Natty. I'm going to stick with it here. The Wolverines, though, great roster. It's going to be a great game down in Houston, 7:30 Eastern Time. So we have plenty of time to get this one in before midnight. It's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.